The first thing that strikes you is the air. It is sharp, biting, and alive, with a cold that seeps straight into your bones. Why you wouldn't last 24 hours in Viking times becomes clear the moment you set foot in the settlement. The wind cuts through furs and wool as though they were paper, carrying with it the mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and sea brine. A Viking child, barefoot despite the frost, runs past you, face ruddy with cold, not from warmth, but from endurance. He does not shiver, he has been bred for this. You, however, already feel the ache settling in your fingers, the stiffness in your jaw, the desperate longing for comfort that will never come. The Viking village sprawls along the coast, low wooden halls huddled together against the gales. Smoke rises from every roof, but it offers no promise of sweetness. Step inside a Viking hall, and you are swallowed by the haze, your eyes stinging, your throat burning with each breath. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof, and the smoke curls thick, black, and relentless, clinging to every surface, every garment, every hair on your head. Viking men sit around the central fire, their faces lit in flickers of orange and shadow, their eyes narrowed not in welcome but in quiet judgment. The air reeks of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and the fat of animals crackling over the flames. The floor is packed earth, damp from the sea mist that never quite leaves. Fleas leap from the rushes scattered beneath your boots, their bite a steady reminder that there is no such thing as clean. You scratch without knowing it, but to the Viking woman grinding barley with her calloused hands, it is nothing. She has lived with this itch her whole life, and her skin is tough as leather from labour, the lines of her palms darkened by years of smoke and toil. Hunger strikes almost immediately, the cold gnaws, but so does the emptiness in your stomach. A wooden bowl is pressed into your hands, filled with pottage, a watery stew of beans and roots, thick with smoke and dirt. This is Viking food, eaten day after day, boiled in the same pot until it tastes more of iron than of herbs. It is sustenance, nothing more. The Viking men slurp it without complaint, their shoulders bent with the weight of work yet to be done. You gag at the taste, and already they know you will not last. Outside, the sea crashes, relentless and eternal. It is both lifeblood and executioner, feeding the people with fish when the catch is kind, stealing lives when storms rise without warning. A Viking ship rocks at the shore, its dragon-head prow glaring through the mist. To step upon it is to wager your soul against the waves, and yet for them it is as ordinary as breathing. A Viking man hauls ropes with hands so rough they seem carved from oak. His breath steams in the air, and he does not falter. Your own chest feels tight merely watching. Night will fall early. Darkness in this land is not gentle. It smothers, howls, and reminds you that firewood is scarce and warmth is won by endurance. Families will huddle together in their halls, Viking child pressed against Viking mother, the air still heavy with smoke, lice crawling through hair, coughs rattling in the throats of the old. To you it is suffocation, to them it is survival. One breath of this life is already too much. The cold, the hunger, the endless labour, the smoke that clings to your lungs, it would undo you before the sun had set. For the Viking, this is but the first hour of another day. For you, it is the beginning of proof that you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The first light of dawn does not come softly here. It arrives as a command, a sharp blue-grey wash across the sky that drags the Viking village from uneasy slumber into toil. The night's frost still clings to the thatch, and breath clouds the air inside the longhouse as men, women, and children stir beneath coarse wool blankets. There is no lingering in warmth, no turning to softer dreams. Waking to the drums of dawn is not a choice, it is survival. The Viking man rises first, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of another day. His hands, cracked and hardened by years at the plough and oar, reach for a tunic that smells of smoke and sweat, worn too many times to remember. Beside him, a Viking woman is already feeding the fire. coaxing a flame from embers that barely survived the night. Her hair is bound back with a strip of wool, her eyes lined by smoke, and her fingers are busy with the simple, relentless duty of keeping life warm and fed. A Viking child stirs against the rushes, half asleep, but already expected to rise, to fetch water, to carry wood, to do more than most modern men would endure in a day. There is no indulgence in childhood here. The child is another hand for the farm, another back for the burden, another body to be trained in hardship before life demands it. Outside, the village creaks awake. The lowing of cattle rises with the wind, and the sharp caw of crows echoes above the roofs. A thin porridge simmers over the hearth, barley and oats stirred with a wooden spoon that has been blackened by years of fire. This is Viking food, not to be savoured, but to sustain. It fills the belly just enough to drive muscle and bone through the long hours ahead. The taste is of earth and smoke, swallowed without complaint. The chores wait, and they do not forgive idleness. The Viking man steps into the field with an ox at his side, the wooden plough biting into the cold soil. Each step is labour, each furrow another demand on his body. His breath rises like steam, his boots sink into mud, and the frost clings to his beard until it burns his skin. He works not for plenty, but simply so his family may see another winter. The Viking woman bends over her loom, weaving with sore fingers that never rest. She spins wool into garments to shield against the biting wind, her rhythm steady, unbroken, endless. The day has only begun, yet fatigue already presses against your chest, as if you bore their weight. Imagine swinging the axe again and again until your arms feel torn from your shoulders, or hauling buckets of water from the well, while the icy handle bites into your palms. This is the drumbeat of dawn here, not music, not luxury, but the sound of work carved deep into every moment of waking life. As the sun climbs higher, though hidden by clouds, the smoke of many hearths mingles into one heavy pall. Dogs bark, children cry, the hammer of a blacksmith rings sharp against the morning air. All is motion, all is burden, and none may rest until the day's demands have been met. For a Viking, this is the rhythm of existence, a cycle repeated without question. But for you, one morning spent beneath these skies, breathing this air, carrying these labours, would feel like a lifetime of punishment. Already, your limbs would ache, your spirit would falter, and you would find yourself praying for night to come. Yet in Viking times, the day has only just begun, and there are countless hours left to endure. The cold does not simply touch you here, it owns you. It steals into your lungs with every breath, numbing your chest until it feels like stone. The chill in your bones begins the moment you step beyond the smoky shelter of the longhouse, and it clings without mercy. In Viking times, winter was not a season to be endured with comfort. It was a living force, a beast that pressed against every wall, every limb, every soul. And you, soft and untried, would find your strength failing within hours. A Viking man trudges through the frost, his boots stiff with ice, his breath pluming white in the bitter dawn. The wool wrapped around his shoulders is thick, but not thick enough, for the wind cuts through it as if through reeds. His hands are red, swollen, the skin cracked until blood seeps into the cold air and stiffens. Yet he does not falter. He bends to his work, knowing that hesitation could cost him his life and his family's survival. Nearby, a Viking woman stirs a pot above the hearth, though the fire barely pushes back the frost that creeps along the hall's timbers. Her children sit close, wrapped in blankets spun from the wool of their own sheep. A Viking child rubs his hands together, blowing warmth into stiff fingers before being sent outside to fetch wood. The task is small, yet cruel, for the cold does not spare the young. Frost clings to his lashes before he returns, cheeks raw, eyes watering from the sting of the wind. It is a land that knows no pity. Step outside, and the air itself will bite at your flesh, the gusts slicing through tunic and skin until your bones ache as if hollowed. Fingers lose their feeling, toes grow numb, and every breath is edged with pain. In these northern lands, frostbite waits in every breeze. For the Viking, this danger is constant, endured with stubborn resilience. For you, the cold would already be your undoing. Nights are worse. Darkness brings with it an even deeper silence, broken only by the groan of trees and the howl of wolves on the edge of the forest. Fires are stoked until the last scrap of wood is gone, yet the cold always wins. Families huddle close, pressed together on rough bedding of straw, wrapped in wool that smells of smoke and sweat. Still the chill seeps through, gnawing at joints, creeping into marrow. Sleep comes fitful, haunted by shivers and the fear that the fire will die before dawn. The Viking food on which they survive, smoked fish, dried meats, and hard bread, gives them strength enough to face the frost, but never the luxury of warmth. They eat to fight the cold, not to savour the taste. Even so, hunger lingers, making the bite of winter sharper still. A Viking child learns to bear this from the earliest years, skin hardened by countless winters, spirit moulded by necessity. You, untested, would feel the cold as a punishment beyond bearing, each moment a reminder that you do not belong. By midday, the frost has not lifted. The sea still crashes with icy spray that soaks through wool and freezes upon contact. The very air feels heavy, as if laden with the weight of death. This is no passing discomfort, but the daily trial of life itself. And while the Viking men press on with axe and plough, while Viking women weave and mend with numb hands, while Viking children fetch water from frozen streams, you would already be breaking beneath the merciless chill. The cold does not forgive weakness. It seeps, it gnaws, it claims. In this land of ice and wind, your body would falter long before the day was done. For the Viking, it is simply life. For you, it is the proof that you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The morning meal in a Viking hall was no feast of kings, but a simple battle for endurance. Viking breakfast was never meant to please the tongue. It was meant to keep a man on his feet, a woman at her loom, and a Viking child strong enough to carry wood through the frost. When dawn broke and the smoke of the hearth began to stir again, the people did not speak of flavours or delights. They spoke only of filling the stomach before labour dragged them back into the fields and the forges. A wooden bowl is thrust into your hands, its contents grey and thin. Porridge, boiled from barley or oats, sometimes mixed with beans or roots, often stretched until it held more water than grain. It is Viking food at its most basic, meant to be swallowed quickly, not savoured. There is no sweetness, no spice, only the faint taste of smoke from the fire and the grit of earth clinging to the kernels. To the Viking man, hardened by years of toil, it is enough to steady his arms for the plough. To you it tastes of ash and sorrow, a poor shield against the hunger that lingers even after the last spoonful. Beside the porridge lies bread, if it can be called that. Dark, dense, and heavy. The loaf cracks as you tear at it. Between your teeth you feel the crunch of stone dust, ground into the flour from millstones worn down by years of grinding. Each bite wears at your jaw as much as it fills your belly. To the Viking woman, who baked it with her own hands in the smoke-filled hearth, it is the backbone of survival. To you, it is punishment, a reminder that comfort has no place at the morning table. The meal is washed down not with clean water, for streams and wells are treacherous with sickness, but with ale thin, sour, and weak. Even the Viking child drinks it, sipping from a wooden cup as casually as milk. The brewing kills the hidden rot of water, making it safer than any spring, but safer does not mean pleasant. The taste is bitter, the smell sharp, and yet it is life itself. The Viking knows no choice. This is the drink of survival, swallowed by all, from the grey-haired elder to the child just old enough to lift the cup. Around the hall, the sounds of eating are plain, and rough spoons, scraping bowls, bread torn with strong teeth, ale swallowed with grim finality. There is no laughter, no idle talk. Every mouthful is taken with purpose. The Viking man eats quickly, already thinking of the field and the axe. The Viking woman spares only moments for her own food before tending to her children, her loom, her fire. The Viking child eats hungrily, knowing that soon he will be set to work, not play. For you, every swallow feels like resignation. The porridge offers no warmth of flavour, the bread no softness, the ale no comfort. It is fuel and nothing more. And yet, it is not enough for the labours that wait beyond the door, the ploughing, the weaving, the endless toil of the day. Your belly growls even as it fills, and your spirit aches for what will not come. This is Viking breakfast, the thin line between hunger and survival, repeated each morning without complaint. To live by it requires strength not of taste, but of will. And you, tasting the grit of stone and the sourness of ale, would already know the truth. You would not last 24 hours in Viking times, for even the first meal of the day would break you. The land waits for no one. When the first pale light spreads across the horizon, the Viking man is already in the field, shoulders bent beneath the weight of labour that has no end. The soil is hard, damp with frost, and stubborn against the wooden plough that creaks in his calloused hands. An ox, broad-backed and slow, strains against the yoke, its breath steaming into the morning air. Every furrow carved into the earth is a battle muscle against mud, iron will against a land that gives nothing freely. Toil of the field is not a choice, but the law of life itself. The Viking woman joins him, skirts heavy with dew, scattering seeds into the furrows with steady, practiced motions. Her hands are raw from weaving and grinding, yet she bends to the task without hesitation. Viking food does not appear by miracle. Every grain, every root, every stalk of barley has been torn from this soil through sweat and hardship. A Viking child trots at her side, small hands clutching a sack of seed, learning early that work spares no one, not even the young. Childhood is not for play, it is an apprenticeship in endurance. By mid-morning, the Viking man's palms are blistered, his back a knot of pain, yet still he drives the ox forward. His breath is harsh, his arms ache, but he knows that if he falters, hunger will claim his household when winter returns. Each step in the furrow is not merely farming, it is survival carved into the land. The plough stumbles on roots and rocks, sending jolts through his body, yet he does not curse the soil, he endures it, for the soil is both enemy and provider, demanding blood before it yields bread. The air is filled with the smells of sweat and churned earth. Crows circle above, ready to steal what little has been sown, their harsh cries like laughter at the futility below. The Viking woman shoos them off with sharp claps, her face set with the grim patience of one who has chased birds 1,000 mornings before. Her feet sink into the mud, her shoulders ache, but she scatters seeds without pause, her rhythm unbroken. A Viking child lingers nearby, his arms trembling beneath the weight of the seed sack, yet he dares not complain. He has seen what hunger does, how it hollows cheeks and takes the weak first. There is no mercy in the field, the sun rises higher, offering no warmth, only a cruel glare on sweat-streaked brows. The ox slows, ribs heaving, and the Viking man shouts, urging it on with a cracked voice that speaks more of weariness than command. Behind them, rows of furrows stretch like scars across the earth, marking the endless work still to come. By the time the meal horn sounds from the longhouse, the Viking man's arms feel as though they are no longer his own, his palms split and bleeding where the wood has torn at them. The Viking woman wipes her brow with the back of her hand, smearing mud across her face, and the Viking child slumps to the ground for a brief moment of rest. Yet none of them linger, for there is more to do, always more to do. For you, even a single hour of this labour would break body and spirit alike. The weight of the plough, the sting of raw hands, the endless rhythm of bending, lifting, scattering, and pulling it would seem unbearable. But for the Viking, this is not hardship, it is life. The toil of the field is their inheritance and their duty, endured without question, repeated without end. And by the time dusk falls, you would know with certainty that you could not last 24 hours in Viking times, for the earth itself would have beaten you down before the day was half gone. Step through the rough timber door of a Viking longhouse, and the air itself becomes your enemy. At first, you think the warmth will comfort you, but then the smoke hits like a fist. Thick and black, it coils from the central hearth, filling the rafters before spilling down upon every man, woman, and Viking child gathered inside. There is no chimney, only a hole carved in the roof, and the wind decides whether it pulls the smoke out or drives it back down into lungs and eyes. Within minutes your throat burns, your chest feels heavy, and your vision blurs with tears. For those who live here, it is simply the price of shelter. For you, it is suffocation. The longhouse is the heart of Viking life, yet it offers no comfort. Fleas leap from the rushes strewn across the floor, their bites constant and merciless. Lice crawl freely through hair and beards, and scratching has become as natural as breathing. A Viking man sits by the fire, tugging absently at his beard, knowing the little parasites cling to him as they do to all. He does not complain. Complaint changes nothing. A Viking woman combs her daughter's hair with a bone-toothed comb, pulling free the lice one by one, flicking them into the fire. The child winces, but does not cry. Tears are wasted here. The smoke clings to everything. Every tunic reeks of it. Every blanket is soaked in its stench. The Viking food, simmering in the iron pot, carries its flavour too. Porridge that tastes of ash, meat that smells of smouldering wood. Yet none refuse it, for without the hearth there is no warmth, no meal, no survival. Even the air is laced with it, filling the belly more than the thin stew ladled into wooden bowls. Privacy is a luxury unknown in this world. The hall is one room, long and crowded, where families eat, sleep, and work side by side. A Viking man sharpens his axe in the corner, while children chase one another around the posts. A Viking woman mends wool garments beside the bed of an elder, coughing through the night. There are no walls to divide rich from poor, no doors to hide from the stares of kin and stranger alike. Every laugh, every cough, every whisper is shared by all. Even in silence, you are never alone. The nights are worse. As darkness falls, bodies lie pressed together on rough bedding of straw and wool, the smoke still swirling above, thicker now with the dying fire. You can hear the scratching of fleas, the murmurs of prayer, the groans of aching joints. A Viking child shifts restlessly, pressed against his mother for warmth, while nearby a dog growls softly in its sleep. Every sound magnifies in the dark, the rasp of breath, the crack of wood, the dripping of water through the thatch. To you, it would feel like a prison. To them, it is simply life contained within walls. By morning, the taste of smoke lingers on your tongue, bitter and unyielding. Your eyes sting, your skin itches from bites, and your limbs ache from sleeping on straw that scratches more than it cushions. Yet, for the Viking, this is home, the place of stories, of meals, of family gathered close against the cold. They do not ask for more, for there is no more to be had. In this choking air, in this hall of fleas and fire, you would understand the truth. The Viking does not live for comfort, but for endurance. You, unprepared for such closeness, such smoke, such filth, would falter before the day was half begun. And in that moment, you would know again why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. Cleanliness, as you know it, does not exist here. Viking hygiene is not the scent of herbs or the comfort of warm water, but a battle against filth that never ends. Step into the longhouse after a day in the fields, and the air itself tells the truth. Sweat, smoke, damp wool, and unwashed flesh woven together until you can taste it at the back of your throat. The stench is not a shame. It is the mark of life in these northern lands, and to you it would be unbearable. Bathing is rare, not for lack of rivers or seas, but for the cold that seeps into the bones. To plunge into icy water is to risk sickness, and so Viking men and Viking women bathe sparingly, sometimes only a handful of times each year. A Viking child may splash in a stream during summer, but in winter the very thought of water biting like knives keeps all at a distance. Instead, they scrape the skin with rough cloths, wiping away the worst of the grime, though never all of it. The smell lingers, woven into hair, into tunics, into the very timbers of the hall. Lice and fleas are companions as constant as kin. Combs carved from bone are kept close, their teeth drawing through hair to catch the crawling pests. A Viking woman might sit by the fire, dragging the comb through her daughter's locks, pausing only to crush a louse between her nails before casting it into the flames. A Viking man scratches at his beard without thought, his nails blackened by dirt, his skin raw from constant irritation. The scratching never ends, even in sleep, and the bites swell until the body grows numb to them. Beds are no refuge. Families share straw bedding laid across the floor, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Dogs curl at their feet, livestock sometimes housed nearby for safety against the cold. In this press of flesh and fur, lice travel freely, biting child and elder alike. The straw grows damp with sweat and breath, replaced only when it rots too far to lie upon. To sleep here is not to rest, it is to endure, eyes closed, hoping fatigue weighs heavier than the itch of vermin. The clothing does not help. Tunics of wool grow stiff with smoke, cloaks heavy with damp, undergarments rough against the skin. Washing garments is a labour too costly to waste on vanity. They are worn until they fall apart, patched again and again by weary hands. The smell of sweat and smoke soaks so deep into the cloth that it never leaves, no matter how many times it touches water. And yet, for the Viking, there is no shame in this. Their gods do not demand perfume. Their survival does not allow indulgence. A Viking man who returns from the field with dirt ground into his skin has proven his strength. A Viking woman who works the loom with hair tied back, lice comb nearby, has proven her endurance. A Viking child, scratching at his scalp while hauling water, is simply learning the truth of life early, that filth is as constant as hunger, and it must be borne. For you, each moment would feel like torment. The crawling of lice on your skin, the sting of unwashed sweat, the stink that never fades from your clothes, these would gnaw at your mind as much as your body. But for them, this is not suffering. It is ordinary, the rhythm of existence, a hardship so familiar it barely earns notice. And so, beneath the smoke, the stench, the crawling vermin, the truth settles heavy. Viking hygiene is not about being clean, it is about surviving filth without breaking. And you, unready for such a world, would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The cry of a raven splits the grey sky, and with it comes the start of another day of toil. In Viking times, even the smallest hands are not spared. The child's burden begins early, long before their bodies are ready, for by the age of 7, play has ended and duty has begun. A Viking child is not coddled, not shielded from hardship. They are pressed into labour as surely as their fathers are pressed to the plough and their mothers to the loom. Childhood freedom, as you know it, has no place here. At first light, a Viking boy stumbles from the longhouse, his breath steaming in the icy dawn. A sack of seed is slung across his narrow shoulders, so heavy it bows his spine. His father walks beside him, driving the oxen through the mud, yet the boy's work is no less vital. He scatters grain into the furrows, his fingers stiff and numb, his eyes stung with cold. His palms are already blistered, though he has seen only 7 winters. Each step is a lesson that hunger spares no one, and survival demands the strength of every hand, large or small. Inside the smoky hall, a Viking girl grinds barley on a heavy stone quern, pushing and pulling until her arms tremble with fatigue. Dust clings to her cheeks, sweat beads on her brow, but still she works. She is her mother's shadow, learning to weave wool, to mend clothes, to tend the fire. Soon she will be taught to spin flax into thread, her fingers raw from the fibres. And if her mother should fall ill or die, the girl will carry her burdens fully, without pause or mercy. The Viking food placed before them at the morning meal does not sweeten their childhood. The thin porridge, sour ale, and hard bread are the same for child and elder alike. No treats are set aside for tender mouths, no softer fare for the young. A Viking child swallows what is given, learning quickly that to refuse is to starve. Hunger, in these lands, is teacher enough. Chores follow one another without end. A boy is sent to fetch water from a stream, the bucket sloshing against his legs until he stumbles beneath its weight. A girl is ordered to mind the goats, her small body braced against the stubborn tug of a rope. They are set to gathering wood, chasing crows from the fields, patching holes in fences. By nightfall, their bodies ache as though they had lived years beyond their age. There is no rest until their parents' voices call them back to the hall. Play exists, but even play is forged from labour. A Viking boy sharpens sticks into spears, learning to fight as much in jest as in practice. Wrestling in the dirt is not mere sport, but the shaping of muscle, the testing of strength. A Viking girl weaves patterns into cloth, not for beauty alone, but because one day her hands will weave for survival. Even their games are shadows of the burdens they will carry until death. To you, it would feel cruel, unjust, unbearable to see childhood traded for labour, laughter turned into sweat, yet for them, it is the only way. The harshness of life allows no softness, for softness would mean death. A Viking child learns early what you could never bear, that survival has no patience for innocence. And so the child's burden presses down with the weight of years, stolen before they are lived. By 7 winters old, a boy knows the plough, a girl knows the loom, and both know hunger's bite. And you, seeing this truth, would know again why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times, for even their children endure more in a day than you could in a lifetime. The making of a warrior begins long before the first true battle is ever fought. In Viking times, to bear arms was not a matter of choice, but of destiny. A boy scarcely past childhood is handed a wooden shield, a blunt spear, or a heavy axe, and from that moment his body becomes both weapon and shield. A Viking man must be ready to fight raiders, defend his hall, or sail with his jarl across seas unknown. Training is survival, and survival is relentless. From dawn until the sun sinks low, the drills begin. The Viking child, barely tall enough to lift a sword, learns to swing until his arms burn and his breath rasps from his chest. Bruises blossom across his skin like badges, his shins and forearms roar from the clash of practiced blows. Each strike against his shield rattles his bones, yet he does not falter. Pain is not punishment, it is the sharpening of flesh into steel. By the time he becomes a Viking man, his body is calloused, hardened, and unflinching, though the cost is a lifetime of scars carried beneath his tunic. Axes split the air with every swing, their weight a test of endurance. Swords clash, wood against iron, filling the training field with a brutal rhythm. The spear is drilled most of all, thrust, block, pull back, thrust again, until the movement becomes as natural as breathing. Fingers split, knuckles bleed, and muscles ache, but still the training does not cease. For a Viking, to falter in practice means to fall in battle, and to fall in battle means dishonour and death. The shield wall is the true crucible. Side by side, the young men lock their wooden shields together, a living wall of wood and flesh. A line of older warriors pounds against them with full strength, driving them back, forcing them to hold even as their arms quiver and their teeth clench against the weight. The line bends, bruises crack, bones snap, yet still they are ordered to stand. In those moments, the lesson is carved deeper than flesh. Alone, a man may fall, but together the shield wall stands unbroken. A Viking woman, too, may learn the ways of the blade or the bow, for not all raids spare the homestead. While many spend their lives at loom and field, sagas tell of shield maidens whose strength rivaled men, and girls were not always strangers to weapons. Even if not drilled daily, they knew enough to defend their kin when enemies came prowling. Survival demanded that knowledge belonged to all, not only to some. By the end of training, sweat soaks through wool, breath rasps in ragged bursts, and the ground is stained with blood, some dried, some fresh. The Viking child limps home, his body bruised and battered, yet his eyes shine with the knowledge that each day's pain is a step closer to standing among the warriors of his people. You, however, would crumble long before. Your arms would fail at the weight of the axe. Your shield would fall from your grip. Your courage would falter at the crash of blows. For the Viking, bruises are nothing, broken bones a mark of pride, and blood spilled in training a small price to pay. Their lives demand that their bodies become iron long before they face the enemy. And for you, the truth is clear. Even in training, before a single real battle is fought, you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The meal is not a moment of pleasure, but a moment of endurance. In Viking times, food was not meant to delight the tongue, but to keep the body standing for another day of labour. The Viking meal is served from a blackened pot that has hung over the same hearth fire for days, its smoke-soaked rim crusted with old broth. Into it goes whatever can be spared: turnips, beans, oats, leeks, and roots, boiled together until they dissolve into a grey, thickened stew. This is pottage, the backbone of Viking food, eaten morning and night until taste itself becomes meaningless. A Viking child stirs it with a wooden ladle, scraping the bottom where charred bits cling, while his mother ladles it into bowls that are shared without ceremony. On better days, a sliver of salted fish floats in the stew, its flesh leathery from long preservation. The salt burns the tongue and dries the mouth, yet without it the fish would rot before reaching the table. A Viking man chews it steadily, his teeth working through the tough fibres as though it were leather. He does not complain his hunger is greater than his weariness of the taste. The sea has given, and to refuse is to insult both the gift and the struggle. Bread, dark and dense, lies heavy on the board. It is ground from rye or barley, mixed with stone grit from worn mill wheels that grind more than just grain. Each bite crunches with flecks of earth and rock, wearing at the teeth until they chip and crack. Yet bread is life itself, the one constant upon which even a Viking jarl depends. Without it, even pottage and fish cannot satisfy. A Viking woman tears a loaf in half with strong hands, passing pieces down the line of children, each one swallowing quickly before turning back to chores that wait just beyond the hall. On the worst days, when hunger claws too deeply, meat is brought out, yet it is rarely fresh. Without ice or proper storage, flesh spoils quickly, turning sour in the smoke-filled air. To mask the stench, spices are ground and scattered across it if the family can afford such luxuries. Pepper from distant lands, garlic, or strong herbs disguise what the nose cannot endure. Still, the taste lingers, a bitter reminder that life is fragile and food never guaranteed. A Viking man gnaws the meat without hesitation, for better foul meat than none at all. You would gag at the first bite, but for him, it is strength enough to carry an axe tomorrow. The hall fills with the sounds of eating wooden spoons, scraping bowls, jaws working through tough bread, children swallowing quickly while their elders keep a watchful eye. There is no laughter here, no talk of flavour or feasting. Food is not celebration but survival, and every mouthful carries with it the memory of famine, of winters when nothing but thin broth kept families alive. A Viking child learns early to eat what is placed before him without complaint, for hunger is harsher than taste. To you the meal would be punishment. The pottage tastes of ash, the salted fish dries your throat, the bread cracks your teeth, and the meat reeks of rot beneath the sharp burn of spice. Yet this is the Viking meal, and it is shared without question, for in this land food is never wasted, no matter how foul. By the time the bowls are emptied and the bread is gone, the fire burns low and smoke clings to the rafters. Bellies are filled just enough to face the labour of tomorrow, but never with comfort, never with satisfaction. For the Viking, this is life. For you, it would be proof once more that you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The cup pressed into your hand is not filled with water. Clear streams and village wells may look pure beneath the northern sky, but the Viking knows better. Water hides sickness, carrying unseen death in every swallow. To drink it is to gamble with fever, with stomach twisted in agony, with life itself. And so, in Viking times, the drink of survival is ale weak, sour, and unending. From the moment the first light breaks until nightfall settles, Viking men, Viking women, and even the Viking child drink from the same brew. It is not the strong ale of feasts, not the deep draughts that leave warriors staggering and songs echoing across the hall. This ale is thin, brewed quick and often, with little strength but enough to kill what water could not. Grain and herbs simmered in boiling liquid, left to ferment just long enough to be safe. The taste is bitter, sharp on the tongue, sometimes sour enough to curl the stomach, but it is life. The Viking man swallows it with steady calm, knowing it keeps disease at bay. The Viking woman pours it into her child's wooden cup without hesitation, for to her it is safer than the stream outside the hall. You lift the cup and wince at the flavour. It does not refresh, does not soothe, but instead fills the mouth with heaviness, leaving a dry aftertaste that lingers long after the swallow. The Viking child does not notice. He has drunk nothing else since his earliest years, and his body knows this taste as well as his tongue knows bread. Where you would grimace, he gulps quickly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before running off to fetch wood. The drinking never ends. At the morning meal, ale is served beside pottage and bread. In the fields, jugs of it are carried to quench the thirst of men labouring beneath the pale Sunday. At night, families gather around the fire with bowls of stew and cups of ale, sipping slowly until sleep comes. Even during voyages across the sea, barrels of ale are lashed to the ship, guarded more carefully than weapons, for without them, death would come before the enemy ever showed his face. The body grows heavy with it. 8, sometimes 10 pints may be swallowed by a man in a single day, though the weakness of the brew keeps him steady. Still, the taste wears on the spirit. Imagine the endless bitterness coating your tongue, day after day, without relief, without the sweetness of clean water to wash it away. The Viking has long grown used to it. You would grow sick of it before the day had ended. Children are not spared. At the morning fire, a Viking woman presses a cup of ale into her daughter's hands as naturally as you might give milk. The child drinks it without pause, her lips stained with the same bitterness that follows her father into the field. No one thinks twice of it, for no one has the luxury to think otherwise. Survival leaves no room for softness. By nightfall, the hall is filled with the smell of smoke, sweat, and sour ale spilled across wooden tables. Cups are refilled, emptied, and filled again. Laughter rises here and there, but even in joy, the taste of bitterness clings. And when the last flames flicker low, when bodies collapse on straw bedding, the final swallow is always ale. For you, the endless taste, the weight of sourness in your belly, the knowledge that even a child drinks it without question, would be unbearable. Yet for the Viking, it is the only shield against a crueler fate, and in that truth lies another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The hall may roar with laughter during feasts and echo with song on rare nights of victory, but by the light of each day, it is ruled by the loom and the forge. These are the twin hearts of Viking survival, the steady hands of the women weaving, and the iron strength of the men shaping fire and metal. Without one, bodies would freeze. Without the other, no blade would rise in battle. Together, they bind the fate of the settlement, though each demands toil that breaks the spirit as much as the body. At the far end of the longhouse, a Viking woman sits before her loom, the wooden frame tall as a man, threads stretched taut from top to bottom. Her fingers move ceaselessly, drawing wool through warp and weft, hour after hour. She has no choice but to weave, for every cloak, tunic, and sail must be made by hand. The wool is coarse, the work endless, and her body bends forward until her back aches with a pain that never leaves. Beside her, a Viking child spins the wool into yarn, little fingers raw from twisting fibres. The girl learns quickly, for she must, and by the time she reaches womanhood, her hands will already bear the hardened skin of her mother. The sound of weaving is the sound of survival. The loom creaks, the shuttle clacks, and the hall fills with the rhythm of labour that never pauses. Each thread carries the weight of the winter to come. Without these garments, the cold would gnaw through flesh and bone until death claimed the weak. And so the Viking woman works, even as her eyes burn from smoke, even as her fingers bleed. Her pride is not in beauty, but in endurance. Beyond the hall, the forge hisses and roars. A Viking man bends to the anvil, the heat of the fire painting his face in red and gold. Sweat drips from his brow, hissing as it strikes the iron. He lifts the hammer high, brings it down with thunder, and the sound echoes across the settlement like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Sparks leap, stinging arms and skin, but he does not flinch. His lungs fill with smoke and ash until each breath feels like fire, yet he drives on, for the axe must be sharp, the sword unyielding, the nails strong enough to bind ships together. The forge is no place for the weak. The Viking child who dares to watch from the doorway feels the heat lash his face like a whip. His father nods him closer, thrusting a pair of tongs into his hands, heavy and awkward. The boy stumbles beneath their weight, but the lesson is clear. Even iron must be tamed, and one day he too must master the flame. Bruises, burns, and smoke-stained skin are not misfortunes, they are the marks of becoming. The smell of the loom and the forge lingers on the air. Wool damp with sweat, iron biting like blood, smoke that never lifts. These are not the scents of comfort, but the perfumes of survival. A Viking woman coughs softly as she ties another knot. A Viking man wipes soot across his cheek as he raises the hammer once more. Neither complains. To stop is to weaken, and weakness has no place here. For you, the smoke would choke, the heat would sear, the endless rhythm of loom and hammer would break your resolve. To the Viking, it is simply life, the steady crafting of strength and shelter in a world that gives nothing freely. But for you, it would be torment enough to drive you to collapse before the day was done. And thus, once more, you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The life of a Viking child was not theirs to shape. From the moment a boy or girl showed the strength to carry wood or the patience to thread a loom, their path was decided. Apprentices and oaths were the chains that bound youth to duty, a binding as firm as iron shackles, though not forged of metal but of need and survival. By the time a Viking child saw 7 or 8 winters, play was all but gone. The master's voice replaced the songs of childhood, and every day became a lesson in labour, carved deep with harsh discipline. A boy might be sent to the blacksmith's forge, his small arms trembling as he bellows the fire until sparks dance like stars. There he learns to hammer iron into shape, each strike bruising his hands and numbing his shoulders. His master watches with cold eyes, correcting every misstep with barked words or a sharp cuff. Mistakes are not tolerated, for in Viking times a weak axe could mean death in battle, a flawed nail could sink a ship at sea. To learn is not a privilege, but a burden carried beneath the master's shadow for years. Girls were no freer. A Viking woman might take an apprentice at her loom, binding the child to long hours of spinning, weaving, and sewing. The girl's back aches. Her eyes sting from staring at endless rows of thread, but she dares not falter. The loom waits for no one, and her master's hand is swift to remind her of the cost of carelessness. A torn cloak in winter, a sail that splits in storm winds, such mistakes could destroy an entire household. And so, stitch by stitch, she learns to weave her life into service. Oaths sealed these apprenticeships, spoken not lightly but with the weight of the gods themselves. A Viking child swore loyalty to their master, promising obedience until their years of training were done. In return, the master swore to teach the craft fully, to shape the child into one who could stand on their own. These oaths bound tighter than rope, for to break them was to dishonour not only the self but the gods who heard every word. And dishonour in Viking lands was a wound deeper than steel could cut. The years stretched long, often 7 to 14, before an apprentice could rise to journeyman. In that time, the child became an echo of the master, their hands moving with the same practiced skill, their voices shaped by the same stern lessons. But freedom was far away. They lived under the master's roof, ate his Viking food, and obeyed his every command. Nights were filled not with dreams, but with exhaustion, sleep taken on rough bedding before dawn dragged them back to the same toil. Discipline was harsh, for harshness forged strength. A Viking boy beaten for dropping a hammer learned to grip tighter the next time. A Viking girl scolded for uneven stitches learned to pull her thread smoother, her fingers bleeding but steady. These wounds were not cruelty in the eyes of their people, but necessity. A master could not afford softness, for softness raised weak hands, and weak hands could doom a hall. For you, the weight of such an oath would crush the spirit. To surrender your youth, your freedom, your very will to another's command, to endure years of bruises and endless correction without hope of release, it would be unthinkable. Yet for the Viking, it was life itself, the path that ensured the next generation would carry on the work that kept the hall standing, the ships sailing, and the people fed. Bound by apprentices and oaths, the Viking child grew not by choice but by duty. And you, faced with such a yoke before your youth had even ripened, would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The Viking world knew nothing of comfort. Life was a march of endurance, where each breath of cold air and every night's rest was a test. A life without comfort was the common inheritance of every Viking man, Viking woman, and Viking child, and none thought it strange, for there was no other way to live. But for you, even one day in such a world would feel like punishment without end. Clothing offered little warmth against the northern winds. Tunics of coarse wool scratched the skin raw, heavy cloaks hung damp with sea spray, and undergarments of rough linen chafed until the flesh beneath was sore. The fabric smelled always of smoke, for it was dried beside the hearth and never truly washed. Viking women mended tears until the cloth was more patch than garment, for new wool was precious and could not be wasted. To dress each morning was not to wrap oneself in comfort, but to prepare for battle against the day's cold. Shoes were no relief. Made from thin leather, stitched by hand, they were little more than a barrier between flesh and ground. Rain soaked through them, snow froze them stiff, and mud clung to their soles until each step grew heavy. Feet blistered, toes numbed, and frostbite was a constant shadow. A Viking man trudging across a frozen field felt every stone through the sole of his boot, every shard of ice biting through the seams. You would beg to sit, to rest, but he walked on without pause, for there was no choice. At night, there was no soft bed waiting. Straw was strewn across the floor of the longhouse, covered with coarse blankets of wool or hides. The straw grew damp from breath and sweat, then mould crept in, adding its sour scent to the smoke and filth already thick in the hall. Fleas and lice nested in the bedding, biting through the night, so that sleep came in brief, restless stretches. A Viking child curled against his mother, scratching at bites in his half-dream, while the elder beside him coughed into the darkness. Rest was never true rest, only the body collapsing under exhaustion until dawn returned. The body ached always, shoulders stiff from carrying wood, backs bent from endless ploughing, hands blistered from weaving or hammering. Every Viking bore pain as naturally as breath. No balm eased it, no fire truly warmed the bones, no garment softened its grip. A Viking woman rubbed her arms raw against rough cloth as she worked the loom, her skin cracked until it bled. A Viking man clenched his jaw against the sting of cold winds as he pulled at the oar, muscles burning like fire. Yet neither complained. Pain was the measure of life, the reminder that they had not yet been taken by the gods. Even Viking food offered no comfort. The pottage was thin, the bread hard, the salted fish sharp with bitterness. It filled the belly, but did not lift the spirit. There were no sweet indulgences, no warmth of spice save on the rarest of days when trade brought strange goods from afar. Most meals were swallowed quickly, without joy, before bodies returned to the labours that awaited. For you, such a life would strip away will and strength before the sun had set. The endless itch of wool, the sting of blisters, the taste of smoke and salt, the rest stolen by fleas and cold you would break beneath it. But for the Viking, this was not suffering, only the shape of existence. To endure was to live, and to live was enough. And so, in this life, without comfort, the Viking thrived where you would collapse. For you, it would be proof once more that you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The law in Viking lands was not written in books or guarded by parchment. It was carved into flesh, spoken in oaths, and sealed by fear. The shadow of the law hung heavy over every hall and field, reminding all that justice here was no shield of mercy, but a blade that cut without hesitation. To live in Viking times was to live beneath its weight, where one accusation could end in fire, iron, or blood. Disputes were not settled in quiet courts, but beneath the open sky, before chieftains and freemen gathered in the thing. There, words were spoken, oaths sworn, and witnesses called, but truth was not always found in reason. When words failed, trial by ordeal took its place. Imagine being forced to carry a red-hot iron bar across 9 paces, your skin searing, your flesh smoking, while the crowd watched in silence. Days later, if your wounds healed clean, you were declared innocent. If they festered as they nearly always did, you were judged guilty, cursed by the gods. This was Viking justice, harsh and unyielding, where survival itself was proof of righteousness. Other ordeals were no less cruel. The accused might be bound, hand and foot, and cast into a river. If the water swallowed you, you were innocent but drowned. If you floated, the purity of water was said to have rejected your guilt, and you were dragged ashore only to face execution. It was a trap with no escape, a justice that left fate not to fairness, but to the will of gods and chance. Punishments were brutal, far beyond the weight of the crimes. A Viking man who stole food might lose a hand, his stump a permanent mark of dishonour. A Viking woman accused of witchcraft could be burned, her screams rising with the smoke into the night. Lesser crimes earned shame, the stocks in the village square, where neighbours hurled insults and rotten Viking food at the condemned. Some were whipped until their backs split open, salt rubbed into wounds to ensure scars that would last a lifetime. Blood feuds were another shadow, for if justice did not come through the thing, it came through vengeance. Families carried grudges across generations, each life taken demanding another in return. A Viking child might grow knowing that his fate was already tied to a feud born before his birth, his sword destined to answer for blood long spilled. No man, no woman, no family was ever truly safe from the echo of past grievances. Wealth and station shaped justice as well. A chieftain's son might pay blood silver to escape a crime that would see a poor man hanged. Nobles could demand trial by combat, hiring strong warriors to fight in their place. The poor, bound by no coin and no allies, stood helpless beneath the law's shadow, their voices lost against the weight of power. Justice here was not balance, but survival of the strong. Even the dungeons themselves were horrors, cesspits beneath halls, where prisoners lay chained to the walls, left to rot in filth and darkness until their fate was decided. No food was given, save what family could bring. No light entered, save what crept through cracks. Some died waiting, their bones left forgotten in the earth. For you, the fear of such law would break your spirit before a verdict was ever spoken. The thought of iron burning into your palms, of water deciding your innocence, of punishment that scarred forever, these would shatter your will. But for the Viking, it was life's order, accepted without question, endured without mercy. And so, beneath the shadow of the law, the Viking stood where you would fall. One day, one accusation, one trial, would be enough to prove that you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The night is never truly silent in Viking lands. Beyond the crackle of the hearth and the whisper of the wind, there lingers a tension that seeps into every corner of the hall. The threat of raiders hangs like a shadow over all, for even within Viking villages, safety is never certain. A man may wake to the sound of hooves pounding across frozen earth, or to the crash of doors splintering beneath axes. And in that moment, the truth becomes clear: no one is beyond reach. A Viking man sleeps lightly, his axe always near his hand, for he knows that enemies are not only across the sea, but sometimes just across the field. Feuds run deep, old grudges passed from father to son, spilling blood long after the first quarrel has turned to ash. One insult at a feast, one disputed piece of land, one oath broken, and a storm of violence descends. A Viking child grows up hearing tales not only of distant raids upon foreign shores, but of neighbours turned killers, of halls burned in the dark, of families erased in the space of a night. When raiders strike, they strike without warning. Torches flare against the black sky, and the first cry is followed swiftly by the clash of steel. Doors are torn from their hinges, smoke pours from thatched roofs set alight, and the screams of women and children mingle with the roars of warriors. The air fills with the bitter stench of fire, with the metallic tang of blood, with the sound of chaos itself. You would freeze in terror, but the Viking woman gathers her children swiftly, thrusting a knife into her belt while urging the youngest toward the shadows. Survival is not gentle, it is fierce, even for her. The raiders take what they want. Viking food stores are looted, salted fish and barley carried off in sacks. Livestock are driven from their pens, bleating and bellowing as they vanish into the dark. If resistance rises, men are cut down where they stand, their homes collapsing in fire behind them. Sometimes it is outsiders, foreign traders, who have tasted Viking steel and now return the favour. Sometimes it is kinsmen, clans at odds, wielding sword and torch with the same fury as any foreign foe. In the end, it matters little who they are. The result is always the same: blood spilled, halls burned, safety lost. For a Viking child, this terror shapes the soul. He watches his father stand in the doorway, shield raised, axe in hand, while flames lick the rafters above. He sees his mother clutch the youngest, her eyes fierce with the knowledge that the gods may claim them before dawn. This is no rare nightmare, but a threat ever present, one that teaches early that peace is fragile, a fleeting thing, always under siege. The aftermath is as cruel as the attack. A hall left in ruins, its roof blackened and fallen. The bodies of kinsmen laid out in rows, their lifeless eyes staring at the sky. Smoke still rises from the embers of what once was home. The survivors gather, hollow-eyed, clutching what little is left. They rebuild because they must, knowing the same fate may strike again. To falter is to die, and so the cycle of violence continues, fed by vengeance, sustained by need. For you, to live beneath such constant fear would unravel the spirit. To lie awake each night wondering if raiders will come, to watch your neighbours as if they might be enemies, to clutch a weapon in your sleep, this would break you before long. But for the Viking, it is the rhythm of life. an ever-present danger endured without pause. The threat of raiders is not an exception, it is the rule. And it is yet another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The sea was both pathway and predator, a realm that gave as often as it devoured. For the Viking man, the sea was life itself, the road to plunder, to trade, to glory, but also the grave that waited beneath every black wave. To step onto a longship was to bind yourself to fate, to risk the cold hands of the deep that swallowed countless before you. The Viking Sea was no gentle passage. It was a test, and it showed no mercy. The longship rocks at the shore, its dragon-headed prow glaring into the grey horizon. Oars rest heavy across the benches, waiting for the hands of Viking men hardened by years of rowing. When they push off, the spray bites at their faces like needles of ice. Salt stings their lips, the wind roars in their ears, and within moments, the land behind them fades into mist. To you, the motion would twist the stomach, but the Viking child who rides alongside his father learns early to balance on shifting planks, his small hands clinging to the wood as the waves strike. The sea is endless, and so is the rowing. Hours stretch into days, arms burning, backs aching, the rhythm never ceasing. When the wind favours them, sails are raised, but still the men do not rest. The freezing spray soaks wool and fur until garments hang heavy, clinging like chains. The cold gnaws at fingers and toes, joints stiffen, and lips crack from salt and frost. Yet the Viking man bends his back to the oar, each stroke carving another chance at survival. Storms rise without warning. The sky darkens, the wind screams, and the sea transforms into a beast with jaws of foam and thunder. Waves tower higher than the mast, crashing down with a force that snaps oars and shatters men's courage. Water pours into the ship, icy and merciless, threatening to drag it beneath. The Viking man lashes himself to the bench, his hands roar as he bails with anything that will hold water. Prayers are shouted to Thor, to Aegir, to any god who might hear above the roar. For you, a single swell would be terror enough. For them, the storm is another battlefield, and only endurance marks the victor. Hunger follows them as surely as the tide. Viking food carried aboard is meagre salted fish, hard bread, dried meat, tough as leather. It is chewed slowly, sparingly, never enough to truly satisfy. Water is scarce, ale grows sour, and thirst burns hotter than the sun overhead. Some journeys stretch for weeks, the men gaunt and hollow-eyed by the time land rises once more. A Viking child who survives such a voyage grows into a man carved from iron, his first memories of life tied to hunger and salt. You, untested, would crumble long before the horizon shifted. Nights on the sea bring no peace. The cold deepens, the stars wheel above, and the ship creaks like a living thing. Men sleep in turns, curled against damp cloaks, their weapons kept close, for the sea is not their only enemy. Other longships prowl the waters, and the clash of oars in the dark may herald battle. A Viking man wakes at the slightest sound, his hand on axe or spear, his body weary yet ready to fight on the swaying deck. The sea is fear, hunger, cold, and death, but it is also pride. To conquer its waves is to prove strength worthy of saga. A Viking man returns from such journeys scarred, hollow-eyed, yet honoured, for he has wrestled with the sea and survived. For you, the salt spray alone would freeze your spirit. The endless rowing would tear the life from your limbs, and the roar of a storm would drive you to despair. But for the Viking, this was the price of life, the toll demanded by the sea that ruled them all. And in that truth, it becomes clear you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. Battle was the song of the sagas, but the truth beneath its verses was horror. Blood and battle in Viking times held no shining glory, no polished tale of knights and chivalry. It was a clash of flesh and bone, the crash of iron against skull, the scream of men who felt their bodies torn apart while the earth drank deep of their blood. To the Viking man, war was duty, a path carved by oaths and the hunger for land and silver. But to stand in that shield wall, with death pressing close on every side, was to face terror that no song could soften. The battle begins in a roar. Viking men lock their shields edge to edge, wood braced, arms shaking with the force of blows. Spears thrust through the narrow gaps, their iron tips driving into flesh with wet cracks. The shield wall shudders, men pressing against one another, the stench of sweat and fear thick in the air. Behind them, the cries of Viking women rise, urging their sons and husbands onward, knowing that if the wall breaks, all is lost. A Viking child, too young to fight, watches from the ridge, his eyes wide as he sees the truth of the warrior's path. Blood, not glory, is its currency. Axes split the air, and when they land, they split more than wood. Skulls cave with a sound that echoes long after, bone fragments flying, blood spraying hot against the faces of those who still stand. Arms are hacked from shoulders, shields shattered, legs broken beneath iron-shod boots. A sword thrust slides between ribs, and a man gasps as though the sea itself has filled his lungs. There is no clean death here, only the slow collapse of flesh torn apart in the mud. And still infection waits, crueler than the steel itself. A Viking man who survives a cut to the arm finds the wound blackening days later, fever burning him alive as rot creeps through his veins. The stench of pus and decay fills the hall as he lies shivering, his family helpless but to watch. A broken bone pierced through skin becomes a death sentence. The gods are called upon, charms and herbs pressed to wounds, but most end the same, death not on the field, but days later, in agony, more drawn out than battle itself. The terror is not only in the wounds, but in the sound. Imagine the clash of shields, the howl of dying men, the crack of bone beneath the axe. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder, pressed against the fear of your brother, unable to flee even as your legs tremble. A Viking man must hold the line, though his heart hammers like a drum and bile rises in his throat. To falter is to be cut down, to flee is to live in shame worse than death. The sagas may tell of honour, but in the moment there is only the will to survive one more heartbeat. When the field is finally quiet, it is no triumph. Bodies lie broken across the mud, their faces twisted in the last grimace of life. Ravens circle overhead, their wings black against the sky, ready to descend and feast. The survivors walk among the fallen, finishing those who still breathe with quick thrusts of the blade, not from cruelty, but because mercy demands it. Then they gather what weapons remain, strip the dead of armour, and leave the rest to rot where they fell. For you, the sight alone would unravel the spirit. The smell of blood and offal, the shrieks of men as they die, the wet splash of gore against your hands, you would crumble before the first blow ever landed. But for the Viking, this was the way of life, the trial by blood demanded of every man. And so, in the heart of blood and battle, where axes split flesh and infection claims the wounded, you would know without doubt you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. War does not end when the last axe falls silent. Its shadow stretches far beyond the battlefield, reaching into the hearths of every home, clawing at the bellies of women and the frail bodies of children. The price of war in Viking times was not only the blood spilled by Viking men upon the field, but the hunger, fire, and despair that followed in its wake. Victory and defeat alike carried ruin, for the earth and the people bore the scars long after warriors returned or failed to return at all. When an army moved across the land, it fed not from stores carried on its back, but from the fields and barns of others. Villages trembled as the sound of marching feet drew near, knowing what would come. Viking food stores, meant to last through the long winter, were seized in moments. Sacks of barley, salted fish, hard bread, carried off by soldiers who cared nothing for the mouths, left empty behind them. Livestock were slaughtered where they stood, the smoke of cooking meat rising even as the farmers wept. What could not be eaten at once was destroyed, left rotting in the dirt so no enemy could use it. Flames often followed. Halls built from timber and thatch went up in fire with sickening speed, the night sky glowing red as families huddled in the dark, watching generations of labour collapse into ash. A Viking woman clutched her children close, the glow of her burning home reflected in their wide eyes. She knew she could rebuild the walls, but she could not replace the food stores already stolen or the livestock cut down in the field. The winter ahead would not forgive her loss. Famine was the cruelest foe, and it came quietly, long after the warriors were gone. Hunger hollowed out the faces of survivors, made their limbs weak and their tempers sharp. A Viking child cried at night with an empty belly, his ribs sharp beneath his skin, his tears falling onto a straw bed damp with cold. His mother whispered prayers to the gods, clutching him close though she had nothing to give. A Viking man returned from battle scarred and weary, only to find his hall empty, his fields blackened, his kin starving. The wounds of steel were easier to bear than the sight of his family fading before his eyes. The land itself groaned under war's weight. Trampled fields yielded little when spring came, and seeds meant for planting had already been eaten in desperation. Flocks that once filled the pastures were gone, leaving silence where once there had been life. Even the rivers carried scars, their banks blackened by fire, their waters choked with ash. What remained for the survivors was a world stripped bare, forcing them to dig for roots, to boil weeds into thin broth, to chew leather softened in water just to fool their stomachs. Warriors sang of honour, but their families paid the truer cost. For every Viking man who raised a sword, a Viking woman bent beneath hunger, and a Viking child bore the weight of famine. Death did not always strike with the swing of an axe. Often it came slowly, creeping through the hall in the form of sickness brought on by weakness and want. You would not endure such aftermath. To see your home in flames, your food stolen, your belly empty, and aching day after day, you would beg for mercy, long before the frost of winter set in. But the Viking learned to survive such horrors, to gather from ruins and rebuild, to face famine with the same grim resolve as they faced the enemy's blade. This was the true price of war, not the clash of battle, but the slow death that followed, stalking every hall, every family, every child. And it is yet another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. Faith in Viking times was not gentle. It was not whispered in quiet halls or sung softly at dawn. It was a raw, living force that bound fear and devotion together like sinew and bone. Pagan faith and fear ruled the Viking world, shaping every harvest, every voyage, every battle. The gods were not merciful. They were mighty, unpredictable, and hungry for blood. To live was to walk beneath their gaze, and to defy them was to invite ruin. Each day began with signs. A raven circling low above the fields, a sudden crack in the ice, a dream of fire, all were omens, heavy with meaning. A Viking man did not take up his axe without glancing at the sky, wondering if Odin watched or if Loki plotted against him. A Viking woman laying her child to sleep whispered charms, fearing the Norns might weave a short thread for her kin. Even a Viking child, scarcely old enough to plough a furrow, learned to fear the shifting patterns of the world, for every shadow, every whisper of wind might carry a god's command. Sacrifices were the answer, the bridge between mortal need and divine will. Animals were bled before sacred groves, their lifeblood spilled upon stones, their flesh burned in fire to please unseen eyes. The smell of smoke and charred meat carried prayers higher than any voice. At times, the offerings were not beasts, but men, slaves taken in raids, or even kinsmen marked by doom. Their deaths were gifts to the gods, for the gods demanded not words but blood. To see such a rite was to feel the cold hand of dread grip the heart, yet the Viking called it necessity. Curses held power too. A whispered hex could poison a rival's crops. A carved rune on a door could summon sickness. Fear of magic ran deep, for in a world where gods walked unseen, men and women sought to twist their will. The seeress, cloaked in furs, eyes distant as though staring beyond this world, was both revered and feared. She carried the weight of prophecy, speaking of doom and fortune in riddles no one dared ignore. To mock her words was to risk the wrath of the divine. Festivals, too, carried their shadows. The great bloats, where entire communities gathered to honour the gods, were drenched in both joy and terror. Horns of ale were raised, songs thundered through the night, but at the centre always lay blood. A Viking man lifted his cup with one hand and his blade with the other, knowing that feast and sacrifice were inseparable. To deny the gods was unthinkable, for famine, plague, or defeat in battle would surely follow. The gods themselves were not distant deities of peace, but warriors, tricksters, and rulers of storms. Thor's hammer guarded the halls, yet storms destroyed ships without mercy. Odin granted wisdom, but often at the price of madness. Freya blessed fertility, but her gifts were bound with sacrifice. To love the gods was to fear them, to trust their power, yet never doubt their hunger. For you, such a world would be suffocating. To live in constant fear that the breaking of bread or the flight of a bird carried divine judgment, to see blood spilled at sacred stones, to kneel in prayer, knowing your life was but a thread in the hands of unseen weavers, you would break beneath it. Yet for the Viking, this faith was strength, binding their people together, guiding them through terror with devotion as fierce as their swords. And so, in the grip of omens, curses, and sacrifices, you would learn the truth of their world. Pagan faith and fear were the breath of Viking life, and another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The Viking world was sharp with blade and iron, yet when sickness struck or wounds festered, the healer's tools were crude things, born more of desperation than knowledge. To fall ill in these times was to place your life in hands that could scarcely hold it. The healer's tools were bloodletting knives, pouches of bitter herbs, and jars of writhing leeches remedies, as likely to hasten death as to hold it back. When a Viking man stumbled home from battle with a gash across his arm, the healer bent close with flint knife and rag. The wound was washed not with clean water, for no such thing was trusted, but with ale or sour milk, the sting biting deeper than the blade that made it. Then came the herbs yarrow, angelica, or garlic, chewed to a paste and pressed into the open flesh. Flies gathered, dirt clung, and fever often followed. Still, the healer muttered charms as she bound the wound with wool, hoping the gods, more than her skill, would decide the man's fate. Bloodletting was the cure for many ills. A fever, a cough, a swollen belly, all were said to come from too much blood choking the body. The healer's knife slit the skin, and red life spilled into a bowl, the patient growing pale and dizzy, as his sickness was believed to drain away. A Viking child burning with fever might have his arm cut so that blood trickled down, his small face drained of colour while his mother prayed beside him. Often the fever left, but sometimes so did the life. Leeches were another tool, kept in clay pots, fat and glistening. They were pressed onto skin to drink greedily, their bodies swelling as they gorged on blood. A Viking woman laid them upon her husband's temples when his head ached, upon his chest when he coughed. The healer swore the leeches drew out the bad humours, but more often they left behind infection, the bites festering until worse sickness followed. To you, the sight of those creatures feeding would be nightmare enough. To them, it was a trusted ritual. Herbs and charms walked hand in hand, for medicine was never just in the body, but in the spirit. A healer carried bundles of dried plants tied with twine, powders ground from roots, and brews so bitter they curdled the tongue. She whispered spells as she worked, calling upon Odin for wisdom, Freya for mercy, or the Norns to weave a kinder thread of fate. To refuse her charms was to invite the wrath of unseen forces, so Viking men swallowed the concoctions and endured the taste of ash and rot, trusting that the gods listened. Surgery, when attempted, was terror itself. Broken bones were yanked back into place, without thought of easing the pain, the cries of the injured echoing through the hall until their voice broke. Skulls cracked in battle were sometimes drilled to release pressure, a desperate act that killed as often as it saved. The healer's hands, stained with blood and dirt, trembled but carried on, for doing nothing was worse than trying. The hall smelled of sickness as much as smoke. The rattle of breath, the groan of fevered men, the weeping of Viking women, cradling their children, all mingled with the bitter tang of herbs. Death hovered close, waiting, and more often than not, it claimed those under the healer's care. The survivors bore scars jagged and raw, reminders of both the wound and the cure. For you, such remedies would feel like torture, each cut, each leech, each foul-tasting brew another step closer to despair. But for the Viking, this was medicine, born of need and bound to faith. They endured the healer's tools, as they endured the cold, the hunger, the battle grimly, without question. And so, beneath the knife and the leech, you would find no comfort, only fear. It is yet another truth that proves why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The stench of death was never far in Viking times. It clung to the air of villages and towns as surely as smoke from the hearth fire, a reminder that life was frail and that death walked hand in hand with the living. To breathe in such a world was to taste decay upon your tongue, to smell the rot of flesh, dung and smoke, until your senses dulled and your spirit wearied. For the Viking man, the Viking woman, even the Viking child, this was ordinary. For you, it would be suffocation. Step into a settlement, and the first assault is the air itself. Narrow lanes run with waste, for chamber pots are emptied into the street, their foul contents soaking into mud already mixed with animal dung. Cesspits overflow behind the longhouses, buzzing with flies, their stench carried on the wind. A Viking child skips past it without flinching, used to the smell since birth. You, unaccustomed, would gag before your first hour was done. Then there are the bodies, the constant reminder that death does not linger politely at the edge of life, but stands among it. A Viking man slain in battle may be laid upon a pyre, his flesh burning as smoke rises toward the sky, the smell of charred bone and fat heavy in every breath. Others, less honoured, are buried shallow in the cold earth, and when rains come, the ground heaves with the scent of rot. Stray dogs and ravens tear at what the soil cannot keep, spreading the horror further. To walk by such graves is to know the gods are fed daily by human sorrow. Disease spreads in this filth, unseen yet unrelenting. Coughs echo in the longhouse. A fever passes from one Viking child to the next until half the hall lies shivering in sweat-soaked bedding. The healer brings herbs and chants, but the air remains thick with sickness. The reek of vomit, of festering wounds, of bodies left too long before burial fills the room until even the walls seem stained by it. For the Viking woman tending her kin, this is simply duty. For you, it would feel like drowning in misery itself. The smoke makes it worse. Every hall, every hearth, every forge feeds the air with choking fumes. The longhouse is a haze of black, stinging the eyes, clogging the throat. Even outside, the wind carries smoke from burning wood, from cooking fires, from pyres where the dead are sent to the gods. The smell lingers in wool cloaks, in hair, in skin, until it becomes a part of you. The Viking man breathes it without thought, for he has no choice. You, your lungs untested, would cough until your chest ached, desperate for clean air that does not exist here. And always, the ravens wait. Their cries echo above the fields, their wings black against the grey sky. They feed on the carrion left after raids, on the bodies of cattle slaughtered in famine, on the corpses of men not granted a pyre. To the Viking, the raven is a sign of Odin, a reminder that the Allfather sees all. To you, it would be the omen of despair, a black shadow circling above the stench of death that never leaves. This was the world the Viking knew disease, dung, rot, and smoke bound together into the very air they breathed. They endured it because they must, because life had no other scent to offer. But you, even before the day was done, would choke on the foulness, your spirit broken by the constant reminder of decay. And so the stench of death, so ordinary to them, would be your undoing. Another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The sun sinks low and does not rise again. Days shorten until they are swallowed by shadow, and the long winter night begins a stretch of darkness so deep and unyielding that it gnaws at both body and spirit. In Viking times, this season was not a pause but a trial, a time when men, women and children alike stood face to face with death each day. You would not last a single week in such nights, let alone endure the endless hours of cold, hunger and fear. The air itself becomes an enemy. Frost creeps into the timbers of the longhouse, curling across beams like white veins of ice. Breath hangs heavy in the air, clouds of mist even within the hall, for the fire never quite drives back the cold. Viking men gather around the hearth, their faces lit red by the flames, their bodies wrapped in cloaks of wool and fur. Yet even so, the chill sinks through bone, settling deep until every joint aches. A Viking woman tends the fire ceaselessly, breaking what little wood remains, her hands raw from the bite of frozen bark. A Viking child curls against his mother's side, his small frame shivering, his lips pale as he fights sleep. Food dwindles with each passing day. What had been stored from the harvest, smoked fish, salted meat, sacks of barley shrinks, until only scraps remain. Meals grow smaller, thinner, and more desperate. The pottage that once filled bowls now barely covers the bottom, its flavour weak, its sustenance weaker still. Bread grows harder, stale enough to break teeth, yet it is eaten gratefully because there is nothing else. Hunger sharpens the eyes of all, and every bite of Viking food is measured with care, for a single wasteful mouthful might mean death before spring. The darkness itself presses heavily on the spirit. The longhouse is sealed against the wind, but the black beyond its walls is alive with howls of wolves, cracking ice, and the groan of trees split by frost. There is no light save the dim flicker of tallow lamps, their smoke mingling with the haze of the hearth, stinging the eyes and filling the lungs. Outside, the world vanishes into endless night. To step beyond the door is to step into a void where death waits in silence. Rest offers no comfort. Beds of straw grow damp and mouldy, blankets thin, fleas relentless even in the cold. A Viking man lies awake, staring into the dark, his stomach gnawing itself with hunger. A Viking woman whispers prayers, clutching charms of Thor's hammer or carved runes, begging the gods to see her family through. A Viking child whimpers softly, dreaming of bread, his voice muffled by the sound of the storm clawing at the roof. Famine and sickness creep in together. The weak grow weaker, the old fade first, and sometimes even the youngest are carried out into the snow when fever takes them. The long winter night is not measured in hours, but in how many bodies remain when the sun dares return. And still the people endure, because to falter is to die. For you, the endless dark would shatter your mind as swiftly as the cold would break your body. Hunger gnawing, smoke choking, wolves howling in the night, you would pray for the dawn, only to learn that it does not come for many weeks. Yet the Viking man grips his axe, the Viking woman tends her fire, and the Viking child learns early that life is a fight against shadows. This is the long winter night, merciless and unending. And it is yet another reason why you would not last 24 hours in Viking times. The day has dragged you through frost, hunger, smoke, and blood, and now the final hour comes. The fire in the longhouse burns low, its smoke curling heavy in the rafters, stinging your eyes and clinging to your skin. Around you, The Viking man sharpens his axe by the fading light, his hands steady despite the bruises of labour. The Viking woman mends a torn cloak, her fingers cracked and raw but tireless still. A Viking child lies curled in the straw, scratching at lice even in his sleep, his thin breath rising in the chill. For them, this is an ordinary night. For you, it is the last hour you could endure. Your body is broken. The cold has sunk deep into your bones, leaving you stiff and shivering despite the furs draped over your shoulders. Your stomach twists with hunger, the taste of thin pottage and sour ale still bitter on your tongue. Every muscle aches from the labour of the fields, every breath rattles with the smoke that hangs inside the hall. The fleas bite without pause, and your skin crawls with filth that no water will wash away tonight. What the Viking calls life, you feel as torment. The night stretches on, filled with sounds you cannot escape: the cough of the elder by the fire, the creak of the loom in the shadows, the distant howl of wolves echoing through the frozen dark outside the hall. The wind rattles the walls, pressing its icy breath through every crack. You pull the blanket tighter, but there is no true warmth, no peace to be found. Sleep comes only in fragments, broken by the gnawing cold and the endless itch of straw and vermin beneath your skin. Your spirit is as weary as your body. Fear gnaws at your thoughts. Fear of raids in the night, of famine still to come, of sickness carried by a single cough in the smoky air. For the Viking, such fears are constant companions, endured as naturally as breathing. They whisper prayers to gods who demand blood, clutch charms carved in bone, and trust that survival is a gift earned through suffering. But for you, unshaped by such a world, the weight of dread would crush your soul before the dawn. The Viking man does not notice your breaking. He has seen it before in others less hardened. He continues his work, silent and steady, for tomorrow will demand more strength than today. The Viking woman hums softly as she stitches, her voice rough, her song not of comfort but of endurance. The Viking child stirs in his sleep, dreaming not of games or freedom, but of the endless chores that will greet him at sunrise. This is the rhythm of Viking life, brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. One day of it has undone you, but for them it is only the beginning of another cycle, one that will repeat until death claims them. To live in such a world requires a will forged as hard as iron, a body tempered by years of cold, hunger, and toil. You have neither, and so you falter. The last hour closes in. The fire sinks to embers, the cold creeps closer, and the longhouse breathes with the sound of weary sleepers who will rise again at dawn. You, however, would not rise. The day has broken you, body and spirit both, and in that truth lies the final answer: you would not last 24 hours in Viking times.